Hey there, sci-fi fans. Thanks for joining us at Dark Loops, where scholarly nerds discuss HBO's award-winning series Westworld and ponder the eternal question, what does it mean to be human? Hello, everyone. Once again, welcome to Dark Loops. In this podcast, we discuss Westworld Season 3, Episode 1, Parce Domine. I'm your host, Scott Jordan, cognitive psychologist from Illinois State University. Joining me on the Dark Loops team are two amazing, highly adventurous psychologists, Dr. Leandra Parris and Dr. Tara Rains. Would the two of you please introduce yourselves, tell us where you're from, affiliation-wise, what you do, and who is your favorite Westworld character and why? Dr. Parris, would you go first?
Again, Leandra Parris. I'm over at William and Mary. I'm an assistant professor of school psychology, and my research area of sort of expertise is mostly around trauma. So my expertise is in crisis intervention and then also peer relationships and social media. And my favorite Westworld character is Maeve because she's kick-ass, and I really identify with her whole maternal instinct. So
I can see Tara over there shaking her fists at the screen.
I knew this was coming and I didn't prepare. I also love Maeve. She's the best. I feel like she really carries so much of season 1 on her shoulders. My name is Tara Rains and I'm an assistant professor of school psychology at the University of Denver. And I study school-based pathways to juvenile justice and ways that schools criminalize youth. I want to have someone different. And I guess for this season so far, my favorite character is Lena Waithe, and that's just because I've got a huge crush on her. I think she's the best in all things. So she had 5 seconds on the screen, but she's amazing.
Oh, she is good. I hope they bring her back. I hope she has more of a storyline.
Me too.
So thank you very much. As I stated earlier, I'm Scott Jordan, a cognitive psychologist / philosopher from Illinois State University. In the laboratory, what I do is I study the unconscious assumptions that underlie perception. More recently, under unconscious assumptions underlying cognition, which we tend to call bias. And from a philosophical perspective, I call myself a holist, and that'll just become clear as we talk. So my favorite Westworld character is Ford. I'm not sure how much of him we'll see this season, but I love Ford's contradiction, the struggle to make something pure, despite the fact he knows reality is beautifully ugly, top to bottom. He still has that nucleus accumbens desire to create something pure, and it drives his character, and I find it stunning. Okay, then, now that we know each other a little bit, let's go. So, Parce Domine, do you guys have any reactions to the title?
So I looked it up immediately because I did not take Latin, and found that it has a Catholic, deep meaning in Catholicism, and so I felt like it set the tone for the entire episode. I think it's God spare us or something along those lines. It's a Gregorian chant.
Yeah, I do think this show beginning with a prayer is probably a good idea.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
Given everything that goes on and the seeming non-savability of everyone involved. That makes good sense. Leandra, do you have any reactions to the title?
I actually didn't pay attention to the title, and so I think one of the things we'll find is that maybe if I had known, I may have interpreted some of the things differently. I definitely picked up on a religious vibe throughout the episode, but I did not. I don't know why. I just never paid attention.
No, it's totally cool. So we'll go into the first scene where Dolores confronts a rich German guy living on the coast of China who owns stakes in Delos, owns a cool smart house, and is a horrible husband. Dolores confronts him with his past and extorts secret files from when he once worked at Insight. So I just captioned a 12-minute scene that is just off the chart good with all kinds of fantastic dialogue. So I think having said that, what are the things that stuck out to you two from this episode, from that scene rather?
Karma, like just,
Mm.
I think it just kind of highlighted like the space that she's in right now is sort of this like avenging, like she definitely has a goal, but
Hmm.
she's also got like I think a underlying agenda of I don't know, I don't know how to put my finger on how to explain it. It's almost sort of like like I said, like an avenging angel almost, like
Yeah,
letting
when she
let it,
forces him to confront his memories,
yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
Yeah.
stunning. Yeah,
I didn't think that was, she didn't have to do that. She didn't have to let the wife live. Like she definitely had, I felt like this other agenda on top of
yeah,
wanting to get access to this stuff. So
yeah.
I really appreciated her knowing. So there's a way in which it looks like she's just gonna make him suffer, but she knew he was gonna do something stupid, right? Like
Right.
she'd read his book. She said she'd read his book,
Right.
and so like her knowing that made her like prepared for him to try to kill her. That
Hmm.
it just kind of highlighted kind of the predictability and how she's able to like read the character based on past actions.
No, it's fantastic. Hey, she's a psychologist, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
me too.
she
Exactly.
is.
I really liked how many borders this male character had to work to sustain to be who he was in every aspect of his life.
Mm.
Memory borders. I mean, he worked so hard while she was showing him his past to pretend it never happened. And like any perpetrator, you come up with all sort of rationalizations, all sort of explanations for why these things happened and therefore aren't his fault. And then you also see just the crazy borders he has to sustain in that smart home to live this life, which basically
Yeah.
the technology provides him a way to never have to meet anyone who doesn't live the kind of life he does. So this dude to me is just like multi-scale Western border man, right? He's just a real nice archetype for what I call the borders of privilege, right? And how much work you have to do on a daily basis to pretend that you deserve all this. So, okay.
Because he doesn't deserve it.
Yes,
Right.
It's
And
exactly.
evidenced by his
she
actions.
literally
Exactly.
blows that. I mean, she doesn't literally blow it up, but
Yeah.
allows him to like fall on his own sword, so to speak. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's an amazing, amazing way of
Yeah.
kind of going about introducing where she's at right now
Mhm.
after all the events that happened in the last season. So
That's very true. She breaks down every one of his borders. She breaks
Yeah.
down his
Mhm.
memory
Yeah.
border. She breaks down his wealth border by just walking
Really?
right into his
Yeah.
house, right? So no, that's a really nice way to talk about that. So in the next scene, we're introduced to Caleb, who's played by Aaron Paul. He's a down and out war vet who engages in frequent phone calls with a former military friend named Francis. He has a job laying cable, no pun intended, probably working for Insight. Um, so it can expand its database. That would be my guess, right? And I also noticed that they have the robot on the side of the building doing the dangerous work. And Caleb's job is to just shuck him cable as he moves up. Caleb eats lunch with his android coworker, visits his mother in the hospital, and then engages in a bit of naughty business referred to as working the night shift. What are
Yes.
your reactions to that introduction to Caleb?
I felt like it was a really good, so we start off by kind of seeing where she is in her headspace. And then also, this is our first glimpse into what the world outside of Westworld actually looks like to
Mm,
someone who's not necessarily like, privileged, right? And so there's all these intricacies that I was not expecting, like, a black market of
mm,
crime. Like, I
Yeah.
didn't,
Digital crime,
yeah,
right?
it's like
Yeah.
Tinder only crime. And so
exactly.
I
With
say
an
as
app
someone,
and everything. It's fantastic.
right, like it's one of those things where I feel like, and just the levels of it, and there's a lot of things you can tell that there's something really deep and brewing in him, and that he's
Mm,
got a past. And I don't know, it was just such and so much information in one scene about how this world functions, and we haven't seen that yet, so that
Yeah.
was
yeah.
really cool to see.
Well, I think there's a lot of questions still about how this world functions too, right? Like like how much of it is digital, how much of it is analog, is any of it analog at all, you know? And
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
it's fantastic, and it's beautifully done. Even though it was supposed to be like the dark, seedy, impoverished underbelly, I still felt like it was beautiful.
Mood shirts, I'm in.
I
Right?
love Marshawn Lynch's his shirt,
My
right?
goodness. And then that Make Money MF app.
Yes.
Yes.
God, when we look at the icons, and one of them is Red Rum. We talked about that a few days ago in Leandra, because Stephen King is, of course, her thing.
Yes.
But it was. I thought that was just one of those nerd geek moments where you get it because you read The Shining, right? Or maybe you watched the movie. I don't know. But there's so much attention to detail there.
Yeah, a ton of Easter eggs. I think you could even just like looking at all the different jobs, and even the way that like Lena Waithe's character kind of talks about like personals, and like this is obviously a very complicated, well thought out enterprise.
Yeah.
That I can't even wrap my head around it at this point.
Yeah. So do you guys think that this world of crime is being monitored, or you think this is the world of the unmonitored?
So yes and no. I think it's being monitored but ignored, if that makes sense, because there's no way that it's done digitally in from my perspective in this world that they've created, and no one knows that it's happening. I think it's kind of like that Dolores and Bernhard, right? Like there has to be a bad to balance out the good. And so I think so much of it is allowed and necessary, right? Because people are going to misbehave. So why not give them a certain amount of like bandwidth to do it?
And rich people need their drugs.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
Like
and I do think that's a good point, that I think, the privileged and the rich are allowing this to continue because they benefit from it. I mean, the privileged benefit from the underprivileged and disadvantaged. And I think also, I don't know that it's worth the time of the system to try to stop it. Right. And so.
Right. No, I like that sort of duality. As Terry mentioned, right? It's a world that the privileged world lets exist until it gets too out of hand.
Right.
And then it'll call in the usual suspects and go through the motions, and while the rich get their drugs. So
right. And it
or
really
their
reminds
cash, or go ahead.
Yeah, or their cash. I was gonna say, it also reminds me a little bit of just like the marijuana in this country, about how like everyone kind of turns a blind eye to it until suddenly you have a reason to want that particular person.
yes.
Right. And so the racism and all the different classisms that come in with that. And so I do feel like it's kind of where we are. Anyway, that just came to my head.
No, well, crime is always paid.
Right.
For the well-to-do. Right? I mean, they get what they want. They can live a front. They can pretend they don't do cocaine, or they can do all these things. And it's just this duality in their privileged life that can't exist if there isn't a non-privileged life doing the work to keep it going.
The privileged are definitely engaging in crime. We saw that in the last season. So, I think it's analogous to the whole, was it John Mulaney? He was like, oh, yay, like pot's legal now. And he's like, all you white people shouldn't be clapping. It was legal for you already, And so like, really it's the crime. Anyway, I think it's just a really great commentary on the different levels of what crime looks like and who it benefits and why we allow it to happen.
And even the response to it, right? So in that second job that he took, when he shows up and they're like, just like kill the guy, basically. And like, nope, he's got a lot of money. So you guys have to like calm him down in a way that he's still alive, basically.
So Charlotte, serving as an interim CEO of Delos, and decides they should start rebuilding hosts. Some of the board members tell her she's crazy. She tells them all to chill. The deaths make the park more edgy. Stocks will rise again. Besides, all the killings were due to one person, our dearly beloved Bernhard Lowe. Obviously, he's being framed. Board members tell her she doesn't have that kind of authority. One guy then points to the iPhone-looking doohickey that has its own seat at the table, and says that, yes, because of this thing here, she does have the authority. And then some guy yells, you're going to let an algorithm make the decisions for this corporation? And then they sort of move on. And she says, yes, the algorithm did say yes. And so what are your reactions to Charlotte's introduction?
So I think one, it was good to see her as more of that kind of, I think a little bit more of the original Charlotte's personality was coming
Mhm.
out, a little bit more in control, a little bit more snarky, a little more elitist than I think. And so it's interesting that this is supposed, correct me if I'm wrong, this is supposed to be Dolores in Charlotte's body, but with Charlotte's personality, or this is, what are we thinking? Tara, you
Their
got,
digital
No.
DNA has been combined. They are a new being.
See, and I don't know. I think it's just Charlotte with Dolores's agenda. I don't know that there's any Dolores in her outside of a common agenda, right? And I think if there was an android Charlotte, she could easily take on Dolores's agenda, right? Like, because she was the one who wanted so desperately to get all the data and to save all the data on all the humans when she was human, right? And she
Mhm.
wanted to use it essentially for blackmail when she was human. So I think as an android, like, Dolores could have made her, woke her up and been like, listen, sis, here's the sitch. Like, you're an android now, and we can take over humanity. And I think the Charlotte who is Charlotte would have been like, sweet, I'm down. You know, like, I don't know that she would have
Okay.
needed any Dolores in her.
Well, that's a great point that they could flesh out later, right? In other words, when they recreate a, when they put a mind in a sleeve, whatever you want to call it, um, how much of does Dolores put in herself, right? When she makes, but particularly, I mean, if she's following Ford's plan, theoretically, they're supposed to have quote unquote freedom of choice, even though they're run by loops. So I'm personally interested to see how they play with this issue. Um, uh, what does it mean to be in charge of something, yet it has its own loops? I mean, welcome to parenthood. But
Absolutely, man.
you know, but I hope they do address that issue, right? And kind of flesh it out philosophically.
yeah, I think either way, again, it was just nice to see Charlotte in her element again. It's the same, similar personality. I mean, she's not acting like Dolores at all. She's acting like the Charlotte that we originally met. And I thought it was such a beautiful, like, feminist view too of this woman just walking in, you know, and a woman, you just be like, you guys, this is what
Mhm.
happened. This is the story. This is what we're doing. Get over it. Like, it was just nice. It was nice to see.
I
And to go
do
back to
agree
the
with that.
visual,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Tara. Go ahead.
No, I was going to talk about basically her clothes and her style.
I'm in.
And I just felt like from the beginning, from season one, she had this like kind of clean look where she's
Mhm.
like not wearing jewelry, not wearing accessories,
Right.
wearing like natural makeup and owning all of the space without any, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
bobbles, like without any distractions. Like, she owns the space. And I felt like that's who we got to see again.
I totally agree with that. And as you two remind me of Tara's character from the first two seasons, or excuse me, Charlotte's character from the first two seasons, I can see how
I would love that
it
to be my
looks like
character.
Charlotte. What's that?
I would love to be able to be that
Hmm.
character.
I have to admit, I would love to be Ford. I know it would
She
be
should have been my
insane,
favorite
but
character.
who says that's not the case already? And I like your comment about owning a space quietly,
Mhm.
right? She doesn't have to run around and intimidate people in an anticipatory way. It's just a
Mhm.
way of being that's
Effortless.
calm and strong, and people are drawn to it, right?
Yeah.
It's not
I'm going
allowed.
to change mine. I want Charlotte Hale to be my favorite character now.
There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
All right then.
I think she's my favorite.
Okay then. So now we come to Bernhard, who's on the run because he's been framed by Charlotte, and he finds himself working at what I'm going to call a butchery. Do you guys have a different name for it?
No,
Cool. All right.
that seems to be a very efficient,
Slaughterhouse. What was
very,
Slaughterhouse.
very efficient. It's all
Yeah.
like, they're like draining the blood out and stuff. It's very,
Hello.
I don't know,
Exactly.
matrixy looking.
And while he's reading about himself being on the run, he receives a massive amount of shade from two thug-looking guys who seem very unhappy. Bernhard goes home then and engages in self-diagnostics to make sure no one's messing with his programming. I absolutely loved this scene. We'll start with Leandra again. Your reactions.
To the self-diagnostics.
Well, just to any part of that whole Bernhard bit.
Yeah, I think, well, one, where is he? Like, did he just like get up and walk out of that room when Dolores was like, "You're now my enemy"? He was just like, "Okay," and then just like goes out into what are those like
Forrest Gump.
utes or whatever? Not utes. I don't know what language I'm trying to speak right now, but those like round tents, like what?
I have no idea what you're talking about, Leandra.
There's like a special name for it, but anyway, point is like, where are you? Like, how did you end up there? And where did you, like, what
he's on the run, man. I mean,
is this like a compound of like ex-convicts, or like is this a compound of like people like down on their luck, or like where? Like, I just felt like it was like a compound of people who had a history and had a story and kind of were on the run or needed to hide from the system, right? Rehoboam and all of that. So anyway, that's just kind of.
Well, now that you describe it that way, it all looked a bit transient, right?
Right.
Didn't look like it was a flourishing homestead.
Yeah, like no one's gonna ask questions. Yurts. That's what they're called.
Oh, you have to explain that to me. What is yurts?
It's just a round tent.
Oh, okay.
It's just a round tent. So I just ended up with like a lot of questions about. I don't know that we need to know how he got there, but just this whole, like, I was paying a lot more attention to like everyone else, not just him, and how he seems to have found a place where these are the outcasts of society almost, or kind of on the fringe, or they're at least like, I don't know.
It's like a day labor camp or something.
Yeah, and even then, he's still an outcast, even among what seemed to be a group of people who are outcasts from society. So he's definitely, keeping it tight, he's not interacting, he's not doing stuff. So that was kind of my reaction. Like, who are these people and how did you end up here? And how do you have money? Like, how do you, I just don't know. What's your identity? Did like Dolores set you up an identity? Like, I just have so many questions.
Well, that is a good question about the scene, because when he starts doing his self-diagnostic and basically pushing a garage door opener to go back and forth from what we'll think of as true Bernhard to public Bernhard, or maybe private Bernhard or core code Bernhard to public Bernhard. I can see him doing that, and I can experience the scene as though that is the code Bernhard, but I can't help thinking that somebody has a code in there affording him those opportunities.
Letting him switch back and forth?
And making him believe, like he's been led since he was Arnold, right? To believe that he's in charge of himself.
Yeah.
The first time he says "what door," I think we'll know whether or not, right? Whether or not he's truly, whatever it means to be truly yourself, right? So
I think, one of my questions though about like the switching back and forth too was that because he is based off of one of the original creators, is it possible he remembers enough to be able to create that code for himself? And in which case he's able to engage in a much deeper level of, I don't know, internal processing. And so that was my other question was like, did you learn how to do this because of who your host is based off of? Or like you said, is this something that Ford put into your code? I don't know. I think that's a good thing to think about. I look forward to seeing that play out.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much good stuff going on. They can pick and choose what micro details they explore over 8 episodes and which ones they don't.
Yeah, totally.
And what I do love also is it just forces this tension in us that we live in every day. When someone's trying to tell us, "Yo, man, let's go do this," and "Oh, you're awesome," and it's like, is this their public code or is this their private code that I'm hearing, right? And we're always struggling to trust people, particularly when they're trying to persuade us. So there's this thing we have even in our interactions in daily life where we just say, well, that must be the core code. And then we reveal all of our vulnerabilities, right? And then they come back to haunt us on public or on social media later. But I love the way that, the tension we're asking about him is something that we actually, and some of us even do this with ourselves on a daily basis. Right? Is that really who I am? Particularly when we generate cognitive dissonance, we do something that we don't think is in line with who we are, and we try to examine our core code, and we remorse about it for a while, maybe have a couple glasses of wine, get some sleep.
Hey, are you like suggesting?
Well, no. I know how my dialogue goes after a while, but partaking.
I
But
think there's something, but there's something that was id and like core about when he switched code, right? Because when those guys confront him and he's got to switch over and he's like, don't forget who you are.
yes,
You know, like there's something that's like primal about that other that other line of code.
you know, I have to say he's probably, I don't know, Maeve would be probably my second character, but Bernhard's struggle for true identity is it's just fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we'll see how they play it out. But he does such a good job of playing that duality. This part of the show actually was what I'll call my moment of mind, or my peace of mind. Um, when Bernhard is switching back and forth from code mode to private mode, it reminded me of a scene from my favorite manga, Ghost in the Shell, from 1995. And there's a wonderful scene where a cop who works for a government agency and has had a chip implant so he can access the net whenever he wants and such. His name is Bateau, and he's talking to his boss. And he says, "Chief, you ever question the ethics of the neurosurgeons who monkey around inside your brain?" And his wise old boss says, "They undergo psychiatric evaluations, especially those in security. They're subject to a stringent screening of their personal lives. Of course, the ones who check out are only human." And then Bateau says back to him, "I guess once you start doubting, there's no end to it." And you know, this is Bernhard. He's just never going to get over his self-doubt. I mean, he's always going to be. He's always has expressed this duality. When he was Arnold, he actually had Dolores murder all of the hosts so that Ford couldn't do what he wanted with them, and then because he thought they were conscious. And that struggle for true self is kind of, that persistent struggle is kind of who he is. And I just reminded me of that scene from Ghost in the Shell. Really love that stuff. So we've been introduced to all four characters, and now they sort of get put into motion with each other. And the next scene, Dolores meets Insight owner Liam Dempsey at an expensive get-together that simply drips with privilege. They discuss the God-believing curse of the nucleus accumbens, and Dolores agrees to meet Liam in L.A.
So I want to go back to the scene with Charlotte Hale.
Yeah.
Is the machine there as a proxy for Liam? Like, is Liam the actual board member, or is the machine the board member? This just occurred to me.
No, I didn't see any clue that would lead me to believe I know. I mean, there's stuff we learned about Rebroham later on that indicates that no one knows what it's doing, and it's sort of in charge. So who would be the he that would sit there? It could be Liam, I guess.
I think I was thinking because doesn't Charlotte say something like, you know, the machine's here for him, or like there's some like notion that the machine is a proxy for someone who's not at the meeting.
And I actually do remember thinking that, because I was like, is this William, the guy in the black hat? Like, he's part of Delos, right? Like, he's one of the major key players, and we don't really know where he's at given the time frame and the sort of time shift. So if that's the case, I'd be willing to bet it's not William or Liam, that it is in fact the man in the black hat.
That would be so awesome.
In the machine as his proxy.
Yeah, I think the machine is his proxy because he's missing, or, you know, because his daughter, last we saw, because of the time shift, we don't know exactly when it is that he entered that room. But last we saw, his daughter has him doing integrity checks.
All right. This is awesome because at the end of the last season, it was implied that the Man in Black was actually a host of himself.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And if he's in charge of Rebroham, there's going to be a fight between him and Dolores for control of Rebroham. Right?
Yes.
That's how that plays out.
And you know he's coming back. You know he's a key player because that actor was still on the bill. And so that, now that you say that, that triggers my memory that I do remember thinking that must be, his name is William, right? I didn't make that up.
Yes, no, it's
Yeah.
William. I like
Um,
the Man in Black, but his name is William as well. And by the way, he's up near the top of my characters. You can't go wrong with Ed Harris, right?
Never.
You
He's
know,
amazing.
um, I guess it's up to the individual viewer to sort of believe his arc from the first 2 seasons, right? That he was such a starry-eyed believer in love, that intensity went binary when he found out Dolores was a host, and then he just went from love to hate in that sort of switched way. If one buys that, he's a stunning character. I have to admit, I love the acting. I wasn't completely persuaded, but I still loved it.
I just felt like it was too simple, right? Like he goes from all good to all bad. Like
No, that was kind of the
binary was too
feeling
simple.
I had. Again, I loved it. And he's also, interesting enough, he's kind of like Bernhard, except Bernhard's a little more honest with himself. The Man in Black seems to be able to go from one binary to the other and just believe it, right? So he's just a switch. Whereas Bernhard never believes it, whatever state he's in. He's always doubting himself, and he's always going. And that tension is makes one adaptable. And so I bet you if we could measure whatever that is across a population, you'd probably find a distribution that had a smaller percentage of the population actually being what some might call unstable, what I'm calling adaptable.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's a better quality to have, to just not trust yourself.
Well, you just got to surround yourself with people of like type, right? And kind of revel in the instability instead of
Yes.
Well, and I think it's
engaging in self-doubt.
two different reactions to the same
Exactly.
realization that you don't know what you thought you knew. Like both of them have that experience, and one just decides I'm the expert and everyone else is like, there's this thing that I have to figure out. I'm going to figure out the maze. I'm going to figure out what's at the center. And that drives him to own the process, as opposed to Bernard, like you said, he was constantly questioning it.
Yeah.
I actually think William may be more complicated than we're seeing right now. Because like when his wife dies, he does get upset. He does, like, I don't know, I feel like there's something else going on with him, and maybe him being a host would explain what or maybe I just love this actor and I want to think that he has more depth than just sometimes I'm faking good but mostly I'm bad, like.
Right. Well, it could be like those two characters in particular represent two ends of the stability and instability struggle.
Yeah, it's true.
And the Man in Black ends in stable states for the most part, whereas Bernhard doesn't. And so okay, so do we want to discuss the curse of the nucleus accumbens? The idea that the human mind evolved to believe in God, and the one guy says, I'm an atheist, and she goes, yeah, maybe you don't believe what you were built to. One thing I'll say about that is, what I did like about that and didn't like about it is this, I just call it the quest for purity, the quest for certainty, whatever you want to call it. Sitting in any meeting talking to people, I'm always trying to figure out what's certain about this, what is the thing to believe. I think we don't have to call that God necessarily, right? We can call it the quest for certainty, quest for truth, which is Black man emphasis. Yeah.
I think it's that big T truth, right?
Yeah.
And I think she knows that humans are wired to search for that and has every intention of exploiting it.
Yes.
Faith is so key to the human condition, right? Like you have to believe something better, something else, or something more either gave you what you got or is to come or will evolve. And so I think she plans to really kind of play on that and use it to her advantage.
Does she suffer from the same thing? I'm going to say yes. She was created in Ford's image, and she believes in a better world, and she believes in a truth about how the world can be better. Later on, when she's introduced to Rabroham, she gets excited about the idea of a plan for everyone. So again, it's interesting because she doesn't then notice she has the same issue because she labels it God, right? She doesn't call it the quest for truth, but so I hope they call back on that, right? I hope they point out that maybe it's kind of impossible to be what we are without a drive for certainty, right? And some people have committed themselves to not being satisfied in that quest, i.e. scientists, and some have committed themselves to not acknowledging those tensions and just believing. Then the next scene, a very nicely dressed Caleb sits with a group of other nicely dressed job applicants, remembering conversations with Francis about playing the game and getting his scores up. Caleb then engages in a bit of in vivo therapy regarding his reactions to teletherapy. When the therapist asks, "How'd you get here, Cal?" he reflects on his military experiences and he walks out. Frustrated, he engages in a bit of wet work at a futuristic Studio 54 where he talks down a rich guy tripping on beta limbics. So what were your reactions to that sort of second scene with Caleb?
I mean, it's kind of similar to what we were saying before, where it was just getting to know this world more and kind of getting an understanding of the different jobs that he's engaging in and the different things that he's being exposed to. I think there's a scene later that I'm going to call my peace of mind.
There you go.
But the therapy aspect of this program that the doctor references is kind of the first clue as to what he's actually doing, as far as his telehealth. And so I just feel like it was just one of those things where it's not, to me, it wasn't like a groundbreaking scene, but it was informative because we get to see this super rich person who gets to pay people to calm him down and make sure that, he can do dumb shit and get away with it. So yeah, I think it just kind of gave us more info on how the world works and kind of where his head is.
So as psychologists, how do you react to their depiction of teletherapy?
Oh my God, this is so relevant right now with the
I know.
Exactly.
Like in the pandemic, so before we get to your question, can I rewind for a second?
Please do, yeah.
And I want to say, do we know he was in the military? Because everything about the clips that they showed to me felt like kind of a Blackwater thing, like a non-military, militarized civilian group, right?
Yes.
Like, he doesn't strike me as military at all.
There was a scene where they showed him and Francis, or who they're calling Francis, in military garb. And then the next scene we saw, they were coming out of what looked like a building in civilian clothes. And it looked to me like Russian writing on the building. So the Black Ops sort of stuff. Absolutely.
So it struck me that they're probably, and again, like I'm making up my own story, right? Not in the writer's room. But it strikes me that they might have been battle buddies who took on one of these civilian military positions and experienced extensive PTSD from the civilian military experience and not so much from the direct military experience, which comes with a different set of guilt and rules and PTSD and stuff.
Right.
Can
I ask a question about that though? At this point in the timeline, like, how are we not fighting wars with the robots? Like, why are we still sending real people? Is that why you're thinking it's a civilian thing? Because my first response is, why the frick do you need to send in actual human soldiers if you have this capability?
We always have cannon fodder.
Yeah.
Be the cynic now.
It's a really good point. And Delos is still pretty Black Ops itself in terms of, lifelike hosts. So I don't know if they're public enough yet to actually sign a contract with the government to.
Yeah, maybe that's where they're trying to go. Like, I just feel like this is something the government would jump on first.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll do the Clone Wars next season, right? I think.
Yeah, maybe.
I love the Clone Wars.
I mean, but to Tara's point, like, that was just like, I had the same thing. Like, I don't feel like this is a military thing in the sense that we're used to thinking of military.
Right. It's definitely different. And then as far as like the teletherapy goes, like.
Oh, can I comment on your thing about the military quickly? If you're doing Black Ops, you actually increase your ostracism. because you really can't go home and
Mm-hmm.
talk
He's
about
not a
what you did.
hero.
So you're more secluded, you're more isolated, and more ostracized, and therefore PTSD is probably more intense.
Well, you don't have that hero cap on, right?
Right.
Because you know that you're out there kind of as a mercenary, for lack of a better term. And again, I'm making this assumption, haven't lived that life.
Yes.
But do know a few folks who've chosen to work for the non-military, like the private organizations, and it's complicated because they make so much money
Yes.
doing this stuff
Yes.
and don't necessarily feel great about what they're doing or what they're facilitating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
why is he
story
so
that.
poor then? Like, if,
Was he so poor? Maybe he blew it all on his
yeah,
mom's
maybe,
Yeah.
healthcare,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like,
that's
Right.
true. That's a good point. I was like,
Well, like growing up in the temporal wake of Vietnam vets, who didn't come home to the hero's welcome that our troops are getting these days, um, and didn't have treatment for PTSD that veterans do now, or at least don't have PTSD as publicly acknowledged as it is now. Um, their therapy was the Rambo series, right? In other words, we started making movies about how they had wanted to be treated. So they created Hollywood created heroes caps for them. And I think that bifurcation, who went and who didn't, is still at the root of a lot of what we're living in right now.
That's so true.
In terms
Yep.
of who's running Congress and the kind of division we're seeing. So I think there's still a lot of PTSD out there and running a lot of the decisions that are being made. Okay. Anything about this? Well, about the Beta Limbics bit? You mentioned it a bit, Leandra, but this is the Beta Limbics. Must be the drug the guy's on.
Yeah. No, drugs
and-
are always going to be around. They're always going to be like that. It's fine.
And someone's got to bring him down. Someone's got to do the work.
Honestly, like that whole scene looks nothing different than my college days. So I was just kind of like,
I just didn't have an app then, right?
I just was kind of, if I could have called in someone and I was rich enough to afford to have someone take care of me and, I would have done it. So
I gotta tell you,
nothing new under the sun. Like
ever.
Another small micro detail about the production is when Caleb is watching this man lose his mind, he's standing next to another man who's explaining to him why he has to do this personal.
Yeah.
And the acting of that guy is just off the hook. He's got 3 lines, 5 lines. I completely believe that he's in that moment making those decisions and saying those words. I just have to say, you hire someone to do 5 lines and they're that good. That's, for me, that's impressive, because I've seen so many movies where they just don't pay any real attention to the small bits, and it just doesn't work.
It conveys a whole underlying cultural schema, right, of the situation.
Exactly. It summarizes the culture, like his whole approach to the whole thing. Like, you have to do this because he has money, so you're here, let's get it done. Like,
accept it, suck it up.
And that they're reading the lines, that the writers are telling us this through that character, but the quality of the writing is acting, and the acting is, I don't feel like I'm being read to. I don't see the writer, unless I talk to people in this context. In the moment, I experience the scene, I experience the people, and for bit actors to do that, that's just awesome.
I think that's awesome. Just kind of going back, and I know we need to move on, but really quickly about like Lena's character. I hope they bring her back, but even like I would pay that money to have someone as talented as her to display, because you get a whole wealth of information from her body language, the way she discusses things. Like, I think it's a really good point that this show is doing a good job of getting people who can convey a lot in a very little amount of airtime.
Well, I think the choice of having her and Marshawn Lynch in that scene was spectacular, because you're excited to see both of them.
Yes.
Yes,
Right? Like
exactly.
you're like, it's like, let's march on lunch.
And you're
this shirt's
expecting
amazing.
goodness, right? You're expecting goodness.
You know, like you're primed for something amazing to come. And so again, like even just in that snapshot, but that's one of the beautiful things that the writers and the showrunners and the folks who do this show have done is just paid attention to every small detail.
Yeah, and you know what I love about the HBO, Netflix, Amazon world is that now it's the place to be. 2-hour movies are increasingly passe. And I have to admit, if it's a Wednesday night and I'm sitting down and I say, hey, baby, what do you want to watch? 2 hours sounds like a lot of work, even though I watched 3 episodes I say that for 3 hours, but
it's not the same. You want Tiger King on a Wednesday night. You need a little Joe Exotic.
Oh, gee, we do not need Joe Exotic. All right, sorry, but no.
But I think all these people are digging on the idea that Westworld is hip. It's a place to be. You want to be seen there, and I wouldn't be surprised to see someone like Tom Hanks show up in an episode at some point, just to have it on their credits. What'd you say, Tara?
Not until he's corona clear.
Yeah, exactly. No. And I will say, I feel like that's a dedication to storytelling that at least for me, you know, at 34 years, I have not seen in my life. The level of a dedication to telling a story really well, not cramming it into 2.5 hours, really dedicated to a narrative. And that is why I will never get rid of HBO or Netflix or Amazon. I think that it's just offered up a level of storytelling that is comparable to reading a really great book. And that's not something I've ever experienced before.
Yes.
Yes.
And is why I think people are doing what we're doing, is sitting around and talking about it, because they're taking their time and they're making it a really well done piece of art and a piece of humanity that I just can't stop staring at.
Exactly.
Right? Absolutely.
No, it's just the same thing for the production. I mean, the amount of work that went in creating that app and the amount of thought that went into the display on the Night Shift app. Like I said, last time we talked, I did a screenshot of the app and we all laughed for 5 minutes about how much detail they had placed in something.
Yeah.
They would have never placed that detail in a movie 5-10 years ago, because no one was going to be watching it and stopping the screen and all that kind of stuff. It's fantastic.
Yep.
So this is also the scene where there's a conversation between Caleb and Francis, where Caleb says Francis told him they rigged the game to make it so that they always won. And so we can see, if you like, Caleb struggling, losing his religion over the course of this episode. And for me, that line just kind of says, no, here's why I'm checking out, because all this wearing a suit stuff, sitting in lines and being rejected stuff is for you. It's not for me. And I'm out. So I thought that particular line moved it in that direction. So in the next scene, we find Dolores meets Liam, and I guess it's L.A. And there's a nice bit where he adores the look of L.A. from above and looks down at in as this wonderful state of order. It's wonderful from a distance, right?
Not at all.
He then introduces Dolores to Rehoboam, which is a 1,000,000 strategies per second super algorithm that plans a course for everyone. Liam abruptly leaves. Dolores lifts an electric scooter and follows him. She catches up with him, stays out of sight, and monitors his conversation with, I'm going to say, a blondie-looking surrogate who tells Liam they have noticed discrepancies in Rehoboam. They believe it has been hacked, and that we don't know who that is, wants to know who's been doing the hacking. Liam tells her there's nothing to worry about. She threatens him. He stomps off like a good little spoiled brat. So, comments on that scene. And here's where we're introduced to Rehoboam, right? Rehoboam, however we pronounce it. And we've been introduced to Rehoboam subtly over the course of the episode, as you mentioned, Tara, with the iPhone sort of display looking thing at the table, at the board table with Charlotte. And then we've had these scene intros all throughout with a white backdrop and the black circle with the dots forming around, sort of introducing each scene as if this whole thing is being watched by Rehoboam. I just find that so cool. It's just meta on meta, right? And then you start asking yourself, is there a camera in here watching me that Rehoboam has access to as I watch Rehoboam watch other things?
And the answer is yes. Her name's Alexa,
of course, yes.
and she's definitely part Siri. We work together.
They are listening.
I love it. Then we end up with Bernhard, who's back at work. When the shade-throwing thugs confront him, they get violent. He reminds himself to remember himself and says to his self, please don't hurt them. He presses a button on what looks like a garage door opener and goes full on Hulk. Hulk somehow remembers to press the button back to Bruce Banner mode,
Yeah, what was that?
chills out a bit, and then leaves full of remorse. So there's something going on where when Bernhard was in what I'll call Hulk mode, which we would call, I guess, core code mode. I guess I'm assuming that's how this relates to the previous oscillations he was undergoing. Somehow, when he's in code mode, Hulk mode, he's able to get himself back to remember to switch the button. It's kind of a memento thing, right? But what do you do to remember to press the button? Well, you tie a knot on your finger. Well, what do you do to make sure you look at the knot, right? And in the end, there's got to be something in the moment that is the memory connection. At the moment, I don't see that, but I just wondered what you guys thought about that.
So my reaction to that, because I definitely was startled. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So if he is stripping his consciousness away, like that sort of higher order executive functioning away,
like
and he's
that.
he's gonna work at that basic, I think Tara, you brought this up, like id level, was to keep that version from always being in control. And I think it goes back to what you said about Dolores having that speech about like, we need each other, like I need that other side. I don't think that version of Bernhard can function in this society and knows it. It needs that higher order functioning. And so I feel like it's a piece of recognizing, and much like Hulk comes to a similar conclusion, we need each other.
Yes.
We both have benefits. And so I kind of had to take a step and actually pause the TV at that moment and was like, how did he have the control to do that? And I think that, again, it's needing that other side and also recognizing what your purpose is and how you're moving along a common goal for the overarching person that is Bernhard, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my takeaway.
I really hope they flesh out the idea of some kind of routine he does, something with his body, something with his eyes, something he does that makes the switch for him, so that doesn't have to be what we would call a conscious memory. It could be some embodied pattern, like snapping, just something that he has trained himself over time to do, and associate that with losing control or getting too far into code mode. I hope they examine it.
Yeah, I think a lot too. I read a lot of sidebar, but I read a lot of like trashy werewolf romance, and it's the same thing of like controlling the wolf, right? Like letting it out, but the wolf also recognizing that to survive, they need this other aspect of it. And I do think Bernhard is smart enough to build that into his own code, the same way that we as humans are smart enough to overcome our own cognitive thoughts.
All right, you
build that into our own system.
So you just pushed me over the edge with the werewolf thing, because the werewolf stops because of empathy, right? Yeah. And in order for empathy to work, suddenly you're not yourself anymore. Suddenly you're seeing things through the eyes of the other. So what could be going on is when he's beating the hell out of them and starts to empathize with them, it sort of detaches him from being embedded in core self, makes it easier to oscillate back into, or at least makes it easier to oscillate to the, hey man, press the button mode. I really hope they play with that, right? Particularly if they focus on empathy, because empathy really is something we can do to move ourselves out of hate mode. Uh, um, I'll stop
And
there.
it's such a human. We want to think it's only human. There are other species that do it, but like in Star Trek, like that was the thing that Data spent so much time building into his own.
Mm,
I just feel like that's such a human thing to strive for, the ability to turn on and off empathy.
yes.
Um.
And
Anyway,
well, no, that's a good way to talk for our time. More data indicate that, in fact, empathy is a default value in the human condition. Doing what you see others doing is how we imitate, and we don't imitate by seeing and then doing. Actually, when we're imitating other people, what's happening is what they're doing is taking over the planning centers of our brain. And if you watch an infant will imitate anything it can do. So what that means then is, over the life course, we're not so much learning how to imitate, we're learning how to not imitate. We're
Mhm.
learning how to create borders between ourselves and other people. And when I talk about empathy this way, people often get mad. They say, oh man, empathy is about letting everybody in. So I say, okay, everybody raise your hand. Who knows somebody you wouldn't let into your apartment or your house? Everybody raises their hand. I said, so don't tell me that leaving people out of your life is a bad thing. You're all managing your vulnerability. If we're actually connected to each other through empathy, I'm automatically sad when I see you sad, then we have to manage our suffering, right? You guys are therapists, therapists. You can't just take all that in and walk home. You have to learn how to you have to learn how to manage it. And part of what the training is how to manage the suffering of others that you let into yourselves. Now, if I've totally gone off wrong, please tell me, but this has been my experience talking to counselors. Anyone, please.
Tara, do you have anything you want to add? I just want to make sure that because I just could see your face on the screen, like you have thoughts.
Well, bring them out. Let's
My
go.
laundry is so loud right now, and I leave this in the podcast because people need to know. It's on spin, and so for that reason, I am sitting quietly listening. But please keep talking, and I will just interject.
Okay. Did
Oh,
what
we
I
can't hear it, by the way. I
No,
don't
we
know if
Can't
you're
can't.
hear it,
worried.
really?
No, we can't hear
No,
it.
we
No,
can't hear it.
Oh, I thought you could hear it so loud because I could
No,
no, it's all good.
blasting in my house, and so
Yeah.
only for
like
you, babe.
1,000 thoughts. You all said all of the things in the time that I was muted because I was muted
Oh.
by
What?
my domestic work, which is a whole other podcast.
Ah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but keep going. I'll
Well,
just
Leandra, you heard everything I said about empathy and therapy. What do you
Yeah,
think?
you and I have had this conversation too about I chose to go into academia and not continue my work in crisis because I had so much empathy that I was like the veterinarian who was
Yes.
going to take home every wounded animal to my house. Like at
Yeah.
some point you have to have boundaries, but we also have to be open, and I think it's a delicate balance that as humans we are not always very good at. So to
Right.
expect someone like Bernhard, who's still learning what it means to be human and have his own identity, to do that is a stretch, I think.
Yes. And we know that Arnold was an unbearably empathetic person, to the point of
Yes,
having Dolores murder all the hosts because of his
exactly.
feel all
empathy.
the things, right? And I think
Yes.
Bernard similarly feels all the things. And I think, going back to your point I agree in that I hope that they explore how he makes that shift, whether it's a blood pressure shift or
Oh,
something
yes.
super
Cool.
super discreet. Like it has to be explored, because how does he know
Yeah.
to click back over when he's gone too far? And you're right, Leandra, like I think people who are doing the front lines of mental health work are wide open. For
Mm.
me, when I was in practice, I used to have to come home and change my clothes, right? Because
Mm.
I had to build some type of physical boundary in to know, like, I've left, you know, the receptivity part, like the part where I'm receiving all of the energy and holding things and helping people hold their own things and navigate and move, and moving into my own life, and so
Yes.
I think
And
that's
those
so tricky.
clothes help you sustain those borders, right?
Yeah,
So it goes
absolutely.
all the way back to the first scene, the borders of privilege, right? Now we're talking about the borders of suffering. And we can almost look at every character in the show as what are the borders they're managing, what's the suffering they're managing, and
What are they carrying?
lo and
Yeah.
behold, they end up looking like people.
Yeah.
And so basically what I'm getting from all of this is that every time Bernhard hits his button, he's getting naked. Like that's, I mean, really, he's stripping it down. Yeah, like
Jeffrey Wright wants to get naked.
I am totally okay with that as well. Please, like he is
Or-
such an amazing actor, and he's
Yes.
pulling this off at a level that is just so, I can't imagine the level of
Can you-
talent that is in this
How
person.
satisfying it
I
is
watched
for him.
I watched a thing on him with the Finding Your Roots
Yeah.
face thing. Oh, so good. So good.
Oh, I'm gonna have to go
No,
look
it's
it up.
awesome. Okay, now that we've talked about this at this length, I have to tell you, I hope that it's not Dolores who's programming his switches. I hope they really tackle the issue of how is Bernhard managing this, because in order to do that, they're going to have some pretty strong theories about memory. They're going to have to have some pretty strong theories about identity, and they're going to have to put it in words. They're going to have to put it in actions. So for maybe they don't have to do it, but for someone like me, yeah, you have to do it, because, this switch requires memory, man. And if you don't have memory across modes or whatever you have, blood pressure was so cool, because that's how we know we're getting pissed off.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because that's what and like working with kids with trauma, like you teach them to kind of read their pulse and does your skin feel hot and these different like physiological like triggers so that they can calm their body down. Like, hey, my skin feels hot. I need to take it down a notch. Like whatever's happening, I need to remove myself.
Yes.
So if they don't explore, we should need to do like a change.org petition and have the entire season done again.
Does that work for Game of Thrones?
I was going to say, they'd have to work. Well, I guess you could always do something as poorly as the last season of Game of Thrones.
Oh God, no!
You'd have to work real hard at it, man. Really hard at it.
Let's leave that.
Yeah, we won't do that. So in the next scene, we see Caleb chatting with Francis again as he's like I said earlier, he's slowly losing his religion regarding his faith in the culture and his faith in teletherapy. He's walking the streets at night. He receives a very polite rejection from his most recent job app. He asks for feedback on how to be better. And this is such a sad scene. He's so earnest. And how do I be better? How do I get my points up? It's heart-wrenching. He gets no response. He asks if the questioner is a human. No, I'm Sean. There's all kinds of things I can help you with, Caleb.
Yeah, Sean.
But not how to improve.
Because my HR guy is Sean.
Aha. Coincidence? I don't think so.
Hey, man, don't mess with HR folks.
You know what? If HR wants me to take them seriously, they just stop calling me Linda. God, they still haven't got my name right. Anyway.
Frustrated, Caleb goes back to the night shift. And of course, that pays off in basically the latter parts of the episode here. So what we find now is Dolores. She finds Liam arguing with someone. She empathizes with his quandary in hopes of getting info on Rohobram. Turns out Liam's father locked him out of the system. Dolores is obviously disappointed because she learns that no one's actually controlling Rohobram. And so she pushes harder, using more and more empathy. She's almost about to get the information just before Liam actually tells her. His Scottish, Sean Connery-looking enforcer, whose name is Martin, stuns her supposedly into unconsciousness. Liam wants to call the cops. Sean Connery lookalike goes full-on Highlander, regales Liam with his long history of protecting the Liam family, or the corporation, whichever one you want to call it. He then places a phone call for local talent to come handle Dolores. Any responses to that scene? Don't really have to. I mean, it's pretty much pro forma, right?
Yeah, like it was a surprise to see that guy come in. He was already suspicious of her, and you could tell by the lingering looks. And so I was either he was sexually interested in her or he wanted to kill her, and turns out he wanted to kill her. So
yeah. It was a pretty good introduction to a Sean Connery look-alike, sound-alike. And it leads right into the next scene because it turns out Caleb ends up being that local talent that he calls on. Caleb answers the app. He drives a car with a package to a rendezvous point. He makes sure the bad guys know that he doesn't do personals. The henchman draws a gun. Caleb gives him that stoic pseudo non-response. It's not the first time I've had a gun pointed at my head. And the guy says in, typical B-movie fashion, want to make it the first time you've been shot in the head. And thug talk. And Caleb says, someone beat you to that too. And then if you look at the scene, the lighting is held such that you can clearly see a scar over Caleb's right temple. So it's clear that at some point he was shot along the head, in the head, and not clear. Sean Connery's lookalike then arrives. The thugs all stand down. They all load up in trucks and drive away. So not a whole lot of psychology there, kind of traditional B-movie thug talk. Any other reactions to that particular scene? That's no problem. Caleb walks away. He's chatting with Francis. Sean Connery lookalike gives one of the henchmen some killer drugs that's supposed to kill Dolores. She proves highly resistant. And then some unknown bloke arrives in a self-steering car. Dolores remains asleep. Sean Connery lookalike recognizes the person in the car. The person's obviously dangerous, important, or both. So he calls the guys over. Dolores goes into Hulk mode, kills the guys in the car, kills the guys outside the car, runs over a drug administering thug twice, and chases Connery. Go ahead, Tara.
So when Dolores goes into Hulk mode, it made me think if all of the hosts have this switch, but Bernard's is like manual.
She's
right?
on automatic
Dolores trying to
transmission,
do him a disadvantage. But if they're all kind of wired for survival under a certain set of circumstances.
Yeah.
You know
I actually
what?
think it advantages him.
What's that?
Because he gets to control it, whereas they're an automatic response. If he gets to control it and make that conscious decision, it actually is an advantage for him to be able to control that response. I also, at some point, we need to talk about the music playing in the background at this point.
Please.
So good.
Go ahead.
I mean, can we just say, all right, so I looked at the lyrics because I don't actually know my pulp songs all that well. But, like, I want to live like common people. I want to see what common people see. I want to sleep with common people.
Yes.
Like, you want to be a person. Like, it's just that whole masking of music on top of that particular scene. I could just sit in that and we could talk about that forever, and we shouldn't. But I love that mashup.
I do too. And what I like is showing us all the work that has to be done to live a life where you get to look like you don't work.
Yes.
Right.
And you're common.
And the mashing up of those two worlds is brilliant, because it's all tension from anytime someone from one world is in the presence of someone from the other. It's just pure tension, and it's done so well. I quickly want to go back to your comment about the switch mode on the. I don't want to call them hosts anymore, because they're not hosts. They're not hosting someone, right? So we're just going to use, I guess we should just use their names, right? So Dolores and Bernhard. What I love about the switches.
Synthetics and non-synthetics? Was that on something?
I mean, that's a Star Trek reference.
That's
yeah.
Picard.
So
I was like, that was on something. I know I didn't make that up. Picard.
Which, I mean.
Maybe gods and believers. I don't know. But I think what's interesting is that the way that they switch is just almost like another amplification of their personalities, because Dolores, once the reveries brought her consciousness, she's been very clear about who gets her empathy and who doesn't. And when she was in the presence of Teddy last season, she basically believed what she was doing to him, persuading him to come to her side, do things her way. And despite the trauma it was causing him, that didn't matter to her so much. I mean, she pushed. So what I'm saying is, Bernard's never been like that. So the fact that Bernhard has to consciously control his switch seems to me more diagnostic of the conscious nature of his character conscious in the sense of I've got to think my way through every damn moment. Whereas Dolores, now get me in this mode, get me in this mode. And for her, it's a little more automatic. Whereas for him, the button kind of reflects his highly conscious self.
Yeah, I would say it's also more streamlined for Dolores. So in this scene, she is cool, calculated, never losing control. Bernhard loses control when
Yes,
he
well
comes
said.
over.
Well, maybe because this is external, right?
Right. So I feel like I think you're right. I think it's a lack of integration with those two aspects of who they are or who they could be. And she's just better at it.
Yes. I had a friend once, a good friend, would never go out drinking because he didn't want to lose control. And it wasn't with the drinking that he was scared of losing control. It was with his behavior. And so he consciously then pressed that button and said, no, I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I think, again, this whole switch thing is another, it just goes back to psychology and, like you said, integration, non-integration, binary personalities, that sort of thing. So then Caleb wanders aimlessly for a while. Francis says that even though the game's rigged, you have to play to win. Caleb rejects the Francis simulation because real Francis would have said, we all have to have our own plan.
And that's my moment.
The system doesn't care about us at all, that we had to live our own lives and stick together. All right, go ahead with your peace of mind.
Okay, so I feel like I am dumb and dense sometimes. I was so wrapped up that I had not realized up until this point that Francis was not a real person.
So I think, but no, you're not, because I think that was strategic and you weren't supposed to know until that point, right?
Okay, well, my husband knew and thought I was a dumbass because I stopped the TV and I'm like, what? And he was like, oh, you didn't pick up on when they were talking about the program and his therapist is asking about Francis. I'm like, as a therapist, I would totally ask about your best friend.
You know what? You being a therapist is why you didn't know, because you assumed that they were engaging his community in his treatment.
Yes. Okay, so thank you.
That was an awesome recovery. That's a friend helping a friend right there, man.
That is awesome. Thank you. This is why I love this woman. So I just had a whole moment. So, like I said, a lot of my research is around the trauma and crisis intervention. And we're having a lot of talks right now about virtual worlds and how that can play out in preparing for crisis and recovering from it. And the idea of having someone continuously get phone calls from someone who is not alive. Also, shout out to Kid Cudi. That's amazing. I love him and I love his role in this entire episode. Seems so irresponsible because we want to give closure. So I could see doing something like this in terms of having a conversation for closure and saying goodbye, but this continual holding on to, it's like people who can't stop hearing that last voicemail or looking at that picture every night before they go to bed. That just seems, from a therapeutic standpoint, the therapist is the program works, and I'm like, the hell it does. They can't move on. They can't establish a new normal if you're simulating parts of this thing that they're supposed to be moving. I think that's the whole point. I'm sure the writers were thinking about that of we've gotten so simulated that now the way that we heal has to also include simulation. But how irresponsible. Really?
So do you think that therapist was really working for his benefit? And what I mean is the therapist actually got angry with him and said, even if it doesn't work, you have got to get your act together and adapt to this world. And I just can't imagine a therapist talking like that. Now, I'm not a therapist, but
just all therapists would totally talk that, right, Tara? Just all people would totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think that it's more, I took it in the moment when I was watching the therapist do that, I was like, oh my gosh, so he's not doing the work. He's not putting in the effort. And then when I realized what that therapist was actually referencing, I'm like, the program doesn't work because it completely violates the idea of a new normal.
Yeah. It totally does. It's, I'm glad you brought that up, Leandra, because I was struggling with that. And I feel like I've gotten so out of practice that I don't know what's current science. So my assumption was that I had missed something, and so thank you, because I know you know trauma right now. I don't know trauma right now. Talk to me about criminalization and I can talk to you.
Which again, I think
It's
will come
trauma.
up as we get to know more about
Yeah, for sure.
what he's doing. But I mean, again, I think the writers are intentional in that he's just constantly being shit on between the interview and not getting actual feedback from a human. I mean, we experience this with grants, with friends who ghost us from society. And now you have a therapist doing the same thing and be like, oh, just trust the program, trust this algorithm to be your best friend. No,
Right.
no. You have to come
Well,
to terms with the fact that he's not here, and you can't do that if he's calling every day.
well, but is it because, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, is it because he doesn't have a circle? He doesn't have community. He's got his mom who's got some memory loss stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And like, is Francis his only other person in the world? And was there a plan to fade Francis? Which, if there was a plan to fade Francis, they should not have let him unsubscribe. Right? Like, to me, the whole unsubscribe thing, I was like, what is happening here? Like, this is not appropriate termination.
That to me, and I think that's a great point, because I was like, holy hell, they have mass marketed therapy where you just pick and choose it. And I think that you're right. I would agree with what you said about like there is a rational, like not a rational, but there is an ethical way that this could have been done. But the way it was done was like junk mail.
Guys,
this is Rehoboam therapy. I mean, Francis actually asked him early on, are you thinking about putting your implant back in? And all of this is to get Jesse back into the system.
Yes,
and this guy is not looking out for Jesse's well-being. He's looking to put Jesse back into the system.
Right, which is a systematic injustice that we experience today at so many different levels. And we're seeing playing out with this pandemic that I just cannot... I don't understand people who watch scenes like this and don't understand how it applies to how we are functioning as society today. You know?
Well, part of the problem, and this is a sidebar, it's a big one and it's important, is that this culture, for me, emphasizes individual choice as a causal factor in why we do what we do. Causal, personal choice, individual choice does matter. But you go to any murder trial and there's a myriad other factors that both sides go through to try to figure out why this outcome happened. And I love our legal system in the sense that it understands that choice matters, but there's all kinds of contextual factors that come out of our behavior. And for any one of us, so for me, the over-attribution of choice as a causal factor leads us to this bizarre state of individuality or individualism, where we act like, if we can argue that individual choice is the dominant factor, dominant causal factor in why we do what we do, then we can ignore context. And the value of ignoring context, we don't pay attention to education, we don't pay attention to socioeconomic status. The causal factor is choice. The reason that's important is, in our world, is much the same as to why it's important in Caleb's, is because once you get everybody to believe that it's all individual choice, everybody's on their own. And once everybody's on their own, capitalism can run the roost. Because if you're in a crap situation, it's because you haven't made the choices that would get you out of it. So, our non-holist commitment to individualism doesn't let people tell stories that are multi-scaled, even though this very narrative is doing that, right? I mean, it's revealing that, in fact, the way I like to talk about people is as embodiments of context. And all of us are expressions of our past. All of us are expressions of our present. Choice is in there, but the minute we make it the dominant causal factor, we ignore our connections to each other. We ignore context, and I'm starting to repeat myself. So I think this is Rehoboam therapy, man, and just another trick to get the dude in the system. And I'm glad that he says no, because then we get to stay in this world you mentioned in the song, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
We get to stay there. There's one little bit I just want to quickly go over, because this conversation between Caleb and Francis here is just actually kind of beautiful, where Caleb says, Francis would have said, we have to have our own plan. The system doesn't care about us at all. They would have to have our own plan and stick together. And you were right, but you never had to figure out how to live in this world because you never made it back. It's just really, really beautiful. And then he says, I wish you were here. And I'm thinking, am I hearing Pink Floyd in the background? I mean,
This whole episode was written for me at this point. This whole scene.
Such a beautiful scene, and Paul or Aaron Paul. I just love him as an actor.
Me
That
too.
scene is so vulnerable. What'd you say, Tara?
I was just agreeing. I was agreeing.
The scene is so vulnerable, and he's vulnerable. He was vulnerable from day one to day end in Breaking Bad. He's
Yes.
vulnerable in every scene of this, and it's just stunning to watch. He just makes a good foil. Well, all these characters make such good foils for each other. You learn so much about everyone else when they're with each other.
That was my moment. My moment was when he sees Dolores.
All right. Well, he says, let's talk about that, Cal. And Cal says, no, let's not. This isn't working for me. If I'm going to get on with my life, I'm going to have to find someone real. He
That's my moment.
unsubscribes from Rehoboam therapy and runs into Dolores. Go ahead, Tara.
I just loved the whole setup for that because he's like cutting himself free from this tether to the past. And he's like, I need something real. I need something present. I need something in the moment. And he goes and he finds someone who needs his help, right? Like
Yes.
he didn't go and find something to help him, something to save him. He goes and he finds a way to be the savior in that moment. And that connection when he goes to her and shows her the good part of humanity that she hasn't really experienced, right?
Yes.
Like the humanity that's helping with nothing to gain, that's completely vulnerable.
Yes.
That is in that moment. Like I was like swoon.
Yeah, I really liked that scene as well. I liked how she basically fell in his lap.
Yes.
And he had no problem in that very instant caressing her arm.
Yes.
And
effortlessly.
Exactly. And what I really liked about it is if we are connected to each other through empathy by default, and what we got to work to do is to not empathize, then what he's looking for something to love, something to empathize with. And he actually loses himself in her in that moment of empathy, where that, dare I say, moment of otherness. And loving that is sort of the Buddhist mantra of joyfully embracing the sorrow that is life, right? And when you go into the world with that sense of, not otherness is the wrong way to say it, but the connectedness, where you can lose yourself in empathy for the other, and they can dominate what you're doing at the moment. It feels different than if you're doing risk assessment for yourself.
Yes.
And I thought they hit it. They nailed it. It was a really good way to do that scene.
Can I say I also had a reaction of, is he the Teddy she deserved?
Yeah. Oh, he is the Teddy she deserved.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
He's got the nuance. He's got the past. Like, he's going to follow her
Yes.
dream. Swoon.
Yes. Poor Teddy. I mean, he was just a tool, man.
I mean, he just didn't, I don't think he was, for whatever reason, as advanced in his.
He was programmed to pick up a milk can. Or a
Yeah,
can,
and
right?
to
That's what
like,
it is.
We
Yeah.
all
and
did
to
that.
fail in protecting her. His
Yes.
entire program was to not be where he needed to be and to not be able to stand up and protect her from
Yes.
abuse. And now I think she's landed in the arms of someone who can, and who is meeting her in a place that they understand where she's going to be coming from. So I have two minds of this, though. Like, part of me is like Tara, like, swoon, she's found the right Teddy, she's
Yes.
found the person to like prop up her dreams. And then the other part of me is like, she's going to destroy the world and he's just going to go along with it because he's found his thing, his drive. You know what I mean? Like,
I disagree. I think he's broken in the right ways, right? Like, I think he's broken in the ways that are going to change. Listen to me. I'm like a 23-year-old on a dating app.
Yeah.
I think his trauma and how he moves through and navigates and heals from his trauma with her is going to help her see humanity.
Exactly. He's going to perturb her empathy.
I hope so. I hope you're
Exactly.
both right. I am
Yep.
so much more cynical. Maybe it's
He
just because I've been
has
locked
to.
in
If
my
he
house
doesn't,
with.
I will do a change.org petition. Like, I am like, I don't know.
I think just being locked in my house under this pandemic with my husband and 2 kids has left me at the point where, like, nah. She's gonna take out all that's good. Like,
Right.
But
yeah,
I
he's gonna make her a new human. Like,
I hope that. I
think
honest to God, hope that.
I mean, I hope they don't like end up like sharing their trauma, which happens when you date broken people, which is why you're not
Yes.
people.
And then, like, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie It Follows.
Yes, I saw it with you.
Yes, you did. The final scene where the couple hold hands and walk off, and death is walking behind them, and they don't look back. They just keep walking.
Good.
That's a good moment. And if Caleb and Dolores could get to that moment, that would be fantastic.
As
So
the
look, there's
world is burning behind them. Yeah, that's fine. No.
right.
I'm playing devil's advocate. Like I hope Tara, I think you're right. I think he's gonna bring in a sense of humanity that Teddy never could, which is why he's the Teddy that she deserves. So I am looking forward to that. I really hope they don't go in that direction, that she takes out that last little bit of hope that he had.
I don't
think so. I think he's the perfect toy. Like, I think it's gonna start.
Toy.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be like a cat and a toy a little bit in the beginning, right? And she's not gonna realize that he's etching away at her hostness.
Yes. And his quest for purity is other oriented, right? His quest for certainty isn't mathematical or anything along those lines. It's a empathetic purity, empathetic certainty. So I think his quest for that with her will fuel a lot of tension. And as you said, it'll start off like a cat and mouse. So look, there's this whole gunfight that takes place. We don't need to go through the details of the gunfight, but I have a question for you guys. After the gunfight's over and Dolores is caught up with the Sean Connery lookalike, that car pulls up, or a self-driving car pulls up. A Sean Connery lookalike sleeve gets out of it, walks up to Sean Connery and shoots him. I bet that sleeve, that host, was what was in the self-driving car earlier. Right, he actually saw himself
and he saw himself. Absolutely, I agree 100%. He saw himself, and that's why he started the shooting, because he was like, "What the f?" And
I just love this show. They never did anything to make me have to have that thought, other than a scene separated by 2 or 3 minutes, and then what? Oh, well, wait a minute, that was him. That was pretty cool.
And I think my question was, which one is it? Is it Teddy? Is it the gunslinger? I forget his name, but Maeve's love it.
Hector.
You think it's Hector?
I think it's a totally new host. I think she downloaded that guy's book because it has to be that guy.
So then I wonder, like, what's the importance of that scene where she opens her pocketbook at the end of the last season and you see there's like 5, I think, of those orbs. Like, I feel like those 5 are gonna. It's almost like what's the show where you Battlestar Galactica, where you don't know who the Cylons are. I feel like that's where we're going with this, where we don't know who those core 5 leaders are.
Yes,
I think those core 5 leaders are gonna be the 5 people who they were in the park.
Okay, so you'll recognize them when they show up. I think
we're gonna recognize them when we see them. I think what he is her downloading his book, because from the library. Remember, she was in the library and she like memorized.
That's everything. Right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's her memorizing his book and making a host and being in that room and doing the reveries and doing the things to get it right based on who he is as a person.
You want to take a bet on that? I always love these things. Let's take a bet.
A clear Pepsi.
Love it.
That's how confident.
I don't like Pepsi. I like Coke. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, girl.
No, but it's hard to find a clear Pepsi. Like, you have to get it on eBay.
All right, so I'll get you a clear Pepsi, but I get a classic Coke.
All right, like a real one, like a good one, like the Mexican one.
No, like out of Atlanta, Georgia, in a can.
I will go to the world of Coke and get
Thank you.
So, and what we think might be the final scene, Bernhard gets himself to Rizal Municipal Fishery on Palawan Island in the Philippines and persuades a local to use his boat to take Bernhard to Westworld. Bellowing music, the prodigal son returns. The credits roll, and we think we're finished. But wonderfully, we're not. For who do we see but Maeve? And
yes! Sorry.
She's in Nazi world, right? It's got to be in Westworld. I mean, it's got to be in Delos Park, right? And the trees on the hillside made it look to me like they were it was a northern Italy setting. It didn't look like it would be in France or in Germany. It looked like it just from the greenery, it looked like it would be in Italy, but it's definitely Nazi world. She's been obviously torturing or beating up or
Yeah.
getting information from some Nazis.
I'll be honest, I was too busy admiring her to pay attention in the countryside. But
What kind of outfit is that she was wearing? Is there a form?
it's a very nice, very traditional 1940s like outfit, like business outfit. Like she's a spy is kind of my feel.
Yeah.
Didn't all women dress like that then?
In the show. Yeah, exactly.
On television anymore?
Yeah. Got a very Peggy Carter feel, you know?
Very, very cool. I'm sure like everybody did, much like you did, Leandra, just kind of jumped up in the air. She's just such an awesome character, such a force of nature. So hey, any final comments on the episode?
No, I think you know, they have the previews for the next season, so I think we're gonna end up with a showdown between Maeve and Dolores, and
Happy.
And the
I'm
Man in
excited.
Black.
I don't know what his role is going to be. I am interested to see, because he is one of my favorite characters, not so much that I like him, but that he drives the same inquiry that I have. Like, what is at the maze?
Mm.
Who are you? Who
Mhm.
are these people? What is driving people to make these decisions? I feel like he's a narrator in and of himself, so I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to having him back.
I mean, I think he represents white male privilege.
Oh, yeah,
And,
okay. I don't like that about him, maybe necessarily.
No, I
but
didn't say
Yeah,
like.
that's
I'm just saying
important.
that he embodies that and he carries it through the plot,
he
right?
does, yeah.
And we'll see if he actually comes to an epiphany, right? I mean, maybe that's where they want to go with him. They made him seem pretty hopeless at the end of last season, though. I mean,
It's so, I feel like the William we first see that's played by, and I love that actor, and I always forget his name, was just so much more open.
Yeah.
Like to, you know, and so like
yeah.
I'm wondering if we can see more of that side of who he was.
Well, like we were talking about earlier, they made his switch so binary, right?
Yeah.
That
White hat
at
to
the
black
moment,
hat.
I just at the moment I'm not imagining how they would, you know, perturb his empathy, get him to open it up. I mean, he did kill his daughter. We
But
don't know.
and I do remember being like, how could you not care so much about your wife? But like, he didn't actually love her. He did it for success.
No,
He is the
he was a
epitome of what
sociopath.
happens when capitalism takes precedent over
Yes.
being who you are.
Yes.
So,
and he was, scorned by love. He went for money.
yeah, he was like, "F this shit."
Yeah. Any other final comments? Okay, then. So that's it for this podcast. Leandra, Tara, please tell everyone where they can find you on social media.
So this is Leandra. You can find me at William and Mary's website at wm.edu or on Twitter at Paris Leandra. That's Parris Leandra. Not Linda, Leandra. Thank you.
And Tara?
This is Tara Rains. You can find me on the University of Denver website, which is www.du.edu. If you search faculty, I am there. Or you can find me on Twitter at TCRains2. There will be almost no posts because I am a social media voyeur and not an active participant. But please send me a message. I would love to reply to you.
Awesome. You can find me at the Illinois State University website in the Department of Psychology, www.ilstu.edu. And on Twitter, you can find me at Jordan Jam Party. That's JORDANJAMPARTY. For my 50th, I had a 10-hour jam in my backyard with all kinds of different bands. And that was the account I used to invite people. So if you'd like to leave feedback about this podcast or about episode 2 of Westworld Season 3, leave it below on this YouTube channel or send a message to darkloopsproductions at gmail.com. Again, that's darkloopsproductions at gmail.com. We'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So until then, thanks for tuning in. See you next time.